Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher ATP Geopolitics Ukraine War Update extra video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. I'm giving you the extra tidbits and nuggets, juicy nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater taste for and understanding of the war in Ukraine. I don't want to give you a taste for it. I mean, it's pretty distasteful, and we will see that in some of the propaganda that Russia is pumping out. Yuck. Anyway, where should we start? Let's have a look at giving some props to America, US. Well done, you guys. Awesome. You have been, in real terms, the biggest help to Ukraine in terms of the amount of money you've given, the amount of equipment you've given. Of course, the caveat here, someone pulled me up on this the other day, and I have said this plenty of times before. It's not that I don't know this, but if we look in terms of percentage of GDP, which is the gross domestic product, the amount of, I don't know, a measure of the wealth of a country, or at least how productive it is over a year, then there are other countries who have given more generously as a percentage of GDP, Poland, the Baltic states, so on and so forth. But that's not to take away at all from the US. Done an absolutely phenomenal job. If it wasn't for them, goodness me, Ukraine would be in trouble. In fact, that's worthy of thinking about. Had the US decided not to get involved, would Ukraine be occupied now? Who knows? The number of US self-propelled howitzers, Gimlers, APCs, MRATs, and combat vehicles that were pledged for Ukraine. HIMARS, M270. So those are Gimlers. Those are firing off multiple rockets that are guided and reach their targets with an incredible degree of accuracy. 51. Wow. So 20 HIMARS, and then the rest are going to be the M270, one presumes. M2A2 Bradleys, 50 have been pledged. M109 Howitzers at 67. A bunch of them already there, some more pledged. I think 18 in the last package. Humvees, 1,300. Holy moly. 450 Max Pro MRAPs, mine resistant ambush protection vehicles. They are sit higher off the ground and have often have a V shape underneath, so that if a mine goes off underneath the explosion, there's more of a gap to where the vehicle starts, if you like, and then the V shape underneath can deflect the explosion sort of sideways and out from under the vehicle. That's one of the design features of the MRAP compared to maybe an APC that's generally lower to the ground. And if they go over a mine, they will be more susceptible to damage. M113 APCs, 465. M1117 APCs, 250. Cougar MRAPs 37, just an awful lot of stuff. And the Americans have said that they are going to consider giving strikers. So they are other APCs that haven't as yet given. Some of them have some fairly decent weaponry on top as well. Okay, moving on. This is something that appears to happen, becoming far too common, says Tim White. I'm interviewing Tim White tomorrow on my Atypical Philosopher channel about Ukraine and his experiences of visiting there again recently. Please check it out. That's tomorrow at midday in British time. This is becoming far too common. He says Russia gets to know where the humanitarian aid distribution points are and looks to be deliberately shelling them. It cannot be coincidence. It can be called evil and terrorism. As Anton Garashenko says here, volunteers from Volunteer Home brought aid to Bakhmut half an hour before they arrived. A shell hit a humanitarian point. There are dead and wounded among the volunteer colleagues. Glory to heroes who risk their lives to help others. Absolutely terrible. So anyway, that's a video talking about that. But just Russia have no compunction in doing pretty horrific things like this. When Syria started and Russia got involved there were humanitarian. I think the international HCRC, the International Red Cross Committee, if you like, the organisation that oversees all the different Red Crosses, and I think other humanitarian agencies provided Russia with the geolocation of 24 hospitals and said, please do not hit these here, the longitude and latitude, so that you stay away from them. These are hospitals, please don't hit them. Russia proceeded to hit all 24. as far as I understand it. And when we see them hitting hospitals right throughout this conflict, quite often it is not because they were trying to hit a military target. Arguably, taking into account what they've done in the past, it appears to be a determined effort to take out hospitals in the battle against hearts and minds, for hearts and minds, or at least to break the other people's spirit rather than to win them over. Arguably, it doesn't happen. It galvanizes them. But yeah, there you go. Wouldn't surprise me if that was entirely intentional from the Russians there. Speaking of Russians and exploding things and fire, we have another example of Russia on fire. Moscow, northeast of the city, car service warehouse went up in flames. A roof quickly collapsed. Casualties unknown. Again, it doesn't look like it's anything to do with the war. There's probably a fire like that in the UK of that magnitude once every 5 years or something. It's happening virtually every day in Russia. I know Russia's a big country, and I know it's got worse fire regulations than the UK in all probability. But seriously, I mean, either Russia has some absolutely catastrophic challenges with regard to fires that are an arson, either arson or fire safety, or there is some serious partisan activity going on, or people, and it could be all of these, or people are burning things down to claim insurance because the economy is going to tank or is tanking. All of those might have some rationale behind them, some evidential basis to them. Okay, going on to another alleged intercept. All the usual caveats. Is this propaganda? Is it, is it real, or is it the Ukrainians doing this and recording it? It appears that all the ones we've heard previously have been bona fide. There's no reason to suggest they aren't, unless you're Russian and really don't like the fact that Russians say horrible things. I'm not going to play this because it's too inappropriate. But here's a guy. You can go and find it. Tim White's got it on his Twitter feed. This is a guy that's phoning someone back in Russia and explaining in the retreat from Liman how they outright just shot a bunch of people, how they effed, as in basically raped um, all the young women, captured all the young men. They raped and then killed the young women, and yeah, it's just a whole 52 seconds of really horrific claims by this guy, um, answering his friend's questions about the presence of young women. He says there are none since all were killed by a retreating Russian army. That was after raping them. So, yeah, war crimes are plenty. Terrible, terrible behavior by the Russian troops, it appears. Allegedly, as I should say. Lists of Russian soldiers who died as a result of an attack on a technical training center in the area of temporarily occupied Makiivka will not be published. Quote, that was a quote, due to the threat of, quote, foreign intelligence provocations, military officer of the Samara region, Vadovin. If there is anything that is an admission that a whole load of people died in Makiivka. So the claim was from the Ukrainians, up to 600 people were killed and wounded in Makiivka as they all were billeting in a 3 to 4 story high technical training center, some kind of educational establishment with a basement. And in the basement, or at least in the building somewhere, were huge amounts of ammunition being stored as well. And HIMARS hit with a bunch of rockets, and the whole place was turned to rubble. And the deaths were the numbers were gargantuan. So the pro-Russians, and I had so many bots on my threads. Goodness me, the amount of bots on my threads has gone through the roof recently, and loads of pro-Ukrainian people. Oh, you're pro-Russian people saying, "Oh, you're pro-Ukrainian. You're pro." Yes, I am pro-Ukrainian because I'm a moral human being. What about you? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on these intercepts? So on these intercepts, you've got three options. One, it's Ukrainian propaganda. That's your easy option out. That's what you're saying, no doubt. Two, that person is lying. Three, it's true, right? Okay. But when you start seeing all of these things piling up, when you start seeing evidence of actual torture chambers, when you start having first-hand interviews of people who were tortured, as we are getting plentiful accounts of, you know that there is some truth in these claims. When you start seeing drone evidence of Russians shooting civilians in the back of the head as they're cycling down the road, You know the Russians have committed. I have literally seen Russian war crimes on civilians. So here we have a very interesting claim, which is we are not going to produce the numbers of dead at Makiivka. What they did is they released the Druzhkivka claim to do with missiles taking out supposedly 600 people in Druzhkivka. Turns out I did a whole video on that. Turns out that that's all a load of nonsense. It looks like literally no one was killed there, and you had an ice rink and a rail station getting hit with no one there in the darkness. Then you had Kramatorsk, 600 people killed at Kramatorsk. Didn't happen. 2 rockets, independent Reuters journalist verifying that the rockets landed outside the building they were going for, and there's no evidence the building was even filled anyway. There's no evidence of death, blood, or anything. So 2 misses. Locals in the area saying, yeah, just normal bombs attacking, nothing happened. So they know Makiivka's a problem, that they're releasing their counter narrative, and that they've blown up the HIMARS that hit Makiivka. Oh, that's interesting. You can pinpoint the exact HIMARS that took that. You haven't been able to do that so far. So that sounds very weird. And B, you're saying that 600 people died. That's a very interesting number, because that's the amount of people that were claimed for Makiivka. Is that to say that you admit that 600 casualties did take place in Makiivka? And then you got these escalating figures that the Russians are actually releasing of the number of people who died, and then the idea that there are still so many missing. And now it's got to a point where they're saying, actually, we're not going to release any further figures. We're not going to publish it because of the threat of foreign intelligence provocations. Which is, if there's ever going to be an admission that a whole load of people died at Makiivka, this is it. And I want to know what the pro-Russians in the threads think about this. You know, do you still claim this as outright Ukrainian propaganda, that only 63 people died? Originally, it's 50. Like, just follow what the Russian official line has been: 15 people injured. Then it was 15 people dead. Then there was 63 people dead. Then it was 69 people dead. Then it was 89, I think, was the latest. And then however many people missing. And it's like, and now we're not going to tell you. Now we're not going to tell you, because actually all these people died. Anyway, ran over. On the flip side, Russia's daily claim is that 3 Su-25 fighter jets have been shot down, Ukrainian fighter jets, in the last 24 hours. Again, in philosophy, we talk about inductive evidence. This has happened, this has happened, this has happened. So if these things have all happened and they've been found to be false or found to be true, when this next thing happens or is claimed of the same entity, so you've claimed a false thing, a false thing, a false thing, what's the probability that the next thing you claim is false? Fairly high. Or if it's true, 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 the next thing you claim is true. Don't cry wolf. This is about inductive reasoning. Now, it's not 100% true. Every swan I've ever seen is white. It doesn't mean that all swans are white, or that the next swan I'm going to see is white. The probability is it's going to be pretty high the next one I see is white. Okay, Russian. I've just talked about Russian lies. Russian lies, Russian lies, Russian lies. We've shot down 3 Su-24s. Oh, Su-25, sorry. Oh, is this likely a lie? There's a strong possibility. However, when it comes to things like planes, they have been shooting down Su's quite a bit recently. And these sort of claims are certainly a lot more realistic than we've just shot some missiles into Kramatorsk and killed 600 people. And I put a lot more store in these kind of Russian claims, not being verified, but I would say there's very good chance that at least one plane has been shot down. I would concede, and quite possibly 3 planes. We have seen some Ukrainian losses in the air recently. There's been a serious uptick, which is probably representative of the notion that, or the claim that, they are more in operation in the skies because things are getting tight around Bakhmut. So there's one shot down over Bakhmut recently with video footage of that. Are they doing a lot more operations around there because things are getting difficult? And so they're being called to do riskier and riskier operations. The figures I released this morning, or I reported this morning, of the Ukrainian figures for Russian losses included a boat that was lost. More details are being reported on the mystery of how and where the Ukraine hit a Russian boat yesterday. Don't worry, it was never going to be a Russian warship. You would have known about that already. It's a boat in the River Dnipro. It's something to add to the statistics. Vessels hit by artillery from the right bank. Was anyone on a boat? Don't know. How big was the boat? Don't know. Was it a rib? Rigid inflatable boat? Could be. Is that a big loss? It's less of a loss than an APC, arguably. So there you go. A bit more information on that boat. I know some people might be thinking about that. Okay, now we're going to get onto some mental Russian propaganda. Again, speaks to their predilection for creating narratives, for a lack of truth and credibility, but also it speaks to the fact that they don't half spout some absolute nuts, crazy stuff. So the frequency of Russian propaganda saying we are forced to have this war is increasing. They realize how dire the situation for Russia is and how unpopular the war altogether. Therefore, they push that narrative. But it is only then the Putinists who desperately need war. I will play you this. I'll read out what she says once she starts. So this is not the war we have chosen. It is the war that has been imposed on us, says the person representing a nation that invaded another nation. It's been imposed on them. It's all NATO's fault.
Это не та война, которую выбрали мы. Это та война, которую нам навязали. Нам прямым текстом говорят о необходимости.
We are told directly that the Russian Federation needs to be destroyed, so we should have pursued. No one said the Russian Federation needs to be destroyed, by the way. A different way. But it's just, again, let's just challenge everything that's being said because it's all problematic. The idea that we are told directly that the Russian Federation needs to be destroyed. Who has said that? Who has come out and actually said that? People aren't even willing to say politically, like the leaders like Biden, Sunak, Macron. They don't even come out and say we want a regime change. Like that's too controversial for them. So the fact that you're saying we are told directly that the Russian Federation needs to be destroyed, yeah, probably some bloke on the streets in Kiev is saying that because you've attacked his country and killed half his family. Yeah, somebody's saying that, but it's not the official line of any nations that I know of. We are told directly the Russian Federation needs to be destroyed. So we should have pursued, I'm in a ranty mood today, a different way. But we have what we have, and we have to fight now. Well, that's clear, says another propagandist joining in. Well, that's clear. Still, we have been preparing for this for 8 years. There are such suspicions, judging by the latest regulations. But they also did not sit idly by, she says. This is not the war we have. So the idea is like we've been preparing for this war. It's been imposed upon us. It's all someone else's fault, except we did invade, and we have done a whole load of really bad stuff. It's obviously not admitting that. Right. It's worth listening to her say this in Russian herself. And then I'll read out what she says because you want to hear the anger in her voice. So this is Yulia Chicharina, who is now a Putin propagandist, a notorious supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, also a supporter of the annexation in 2014, whose songs are frequently featured by the Russian state media. This is a medieval mindset Ukraine is fighting against. She is this singer you can see there. Fairly famous in Russia. I saw someone on Twitter saying, "Oh, I used to quite like listening to her songs, not so much now." Here's what she says, but it's the anger with which she says it here. Just this is the power of propaganda and narrative and over unhinged nationalism.
Десятки лет потребительства пытались сделать из нас аморфную биомассу. Мы долго терпели. Пришло время платить по счетам. Посоветую укропам. Сдавайтесь. Все ваши грехи вымерзнут в наших гулагах.
It's useful before I say what she's saying, and that's a great place to stop, is look at her face. Look at the pure, unadulterated anger that is being generated. She's working herself up here. She's working herself into a fury of hatred of the other.
И вы вернетесь чистенькими в наш русский мир, который переплавит все. А всем верным скажу, время настоящей свободы, о которой мы все мечтали, пришло. Сейчас самое время выбирать, кем мы хотим стать. Бессмертными героями или бесславными предателями. Каждый должен встать на своем посту, на своем фронте, на защиту нашей Родины. Всех братьев по оружию поздравляю с наступающим 2023 годом.
Which is funny because that last bit is actually supposed to be an uplifting congratulations of her brothers in arms at the end, but she sounds drunk on her own hatred. Let's just read to you what she actually says here. Uh, this is a pop star saying her piece to Russia on New Year. So
Десятки лет
decades
потребительства
of
пытались сделать
consumerism
из
have attempted to turn us into an amorphous biomass. We've put up with it for a long time. It's payback time. My advice to the chochols, surrender. So she's insulting them there. All of your sins will be frozen out in our gulags. Cleansed, you will return to our Russian world, which will melt everything down. And to all the faithful, I'll say, now is a time of real freedom we've all dreamed about. Now is a time to decide whom we want to become. Immortal heroes or the inglorious traitors. Everyone should take their position on their front in defense of our motherland. I congratulate all brothers in arms with the coming New Year 2023. Hurrah. Everyone, well, how about you? Go on, pick up a gun and go to the front line. See ya. Wouldn't want to be you. What a horrible human being. How positive that message was, and really substantiating why Ukraine should be invaded. And talking about nuts propaganda, I won't play you all of this. This is 11 minutes of a panel suggesting nuclear war, suggesting preemptive strikes. But I am going to play you this part because for my French friends in the listenership here, Thierry particularly, he was happy, I know because he said it in a comment, that Macron gets some serious attention here. France, you are now on the kill list, it looks like, for Russia. So good luck with that. Here is a panel talking about what kind of nuclear strikes should take place and talking about global destruction, basically, and advocating for nuclear usage, nuclear weapons usage. So, what else could be said here? He says, and there are several people speaking. I'll try and differentiate, but you might just have to go with it. What else could be said here? We clearly understand, says Andrei Gulyov, that the Poles, the Americans, and the British are fighting. Let's acknowledge that NATO is at war with us. Isn't it at war with us? Yes, it is. Factually speaking, it's happening. Let's acknowledge that. Secondly, he says we're preparing for doctrine. What is there to prepare? First of all, we should write in a preemptive strike in case of an escalation. Right, I'm going to pause it there. This is interesting. I agree with them. I actually think this is a de facto war against NATO and the West. I don't have a problem with admitting that. You can call that controversial, but we are tooling up Ukraine. But it is the West and NATO and allies of Ukraine coming to someone's aid that needs it for a good moral reason. It just so happens it is NATO and the West. But yeah, so we are fighting by proxy, but we'd rather let the Ukrainians fight that war than our own soldiers for obvious reasons. And actually, Ukraine said we're happy to fight the war, just give us the tools. So that's yeah, we get that. But you know, the reason that NATO and the West and Ukraine's allies are coming to defend Ukraine is because you have been overt oppressors and aggressors, and it is a morally abhorrent situation that you have placed yourselves in. So this is, of course, we're going to defend. We, if I can speak on behalf of NATO, etc., etc. But then he says, we need to start a nuclear war in case of, but you know, because otherwise there'll be escalation. What was his exact words? Let's acknowledge that NATO is at war with us. It is at war with us, isn't it? Yes, factually speaking, it's happening. Let's acknowledge that. Secondly, he says we're preparing a doctrine. What is there to prepare? First of all, we should write in a preemptive strike in case of escalation. So it's like we are going to escalate in case there's escalation. It's like I am going to cut your head off just in case you flick me on the ear. You know, just what? I know my analogy is stretched here, but the idea we're going to escalate this to the maximal level just in case there's escalation. No, that is escalation. What you're doing is the very thing you're decrying that's happening or might happen. It's not. It's a counterfactual. You know, if this happens, we're gonna. Well, actually, we're gonna do this before that happens, just in case there's escalation. Just oh man. And a threat to the Russian Federation with no regard. And a threat to the Russian Federation with no regard to anything else. A preemptive strike, not a retaliatory strike. As we usually sit and wait for the first strike. What do you mean? We usually sit and wait for the first strike. No, you don't. No, you don't. A, there's never been a nuclear war, so that's incorrect anyway to talk about it in that context. But we usually wait for the first strike. You literally just invaded and took the first strike on Ukraine. You did it in 2014 as well. Don't give me we usually wait for the first strike. Yes, definitely a preemptive strike, says Solovyov, who is, uber propagandist. Now let's get on to having a go at the French. Macron is delivering tanks. I'd preemptively strike them. A preemptive strike against France, a party to conflict. That's right, recognise France as a party to the conflict. They say, we provide the tanks, but we're not a party to the conflict. And Germany says we're providing leopards, but we're not party to the conflict. Here are some gifts for you. This is a very serious, extremely serious matter, says the other guy. And now about your nuclear weapons and testing. Everyone is trying to avoid this topic, and he goes on to talk about basically they talk about like huge global destruction after this. But France is definitely in the crosshairs of Russia now. It's like, oh, you provided tanks and saying, well, we're not going to get involved, but you can have our tanks, which is indeed what is happening. So we're going to do a preemptive strike against you, not retaliatory. We are going to preemptively strike you with nuclear weapons, is what these guys are suggesting should happen. Is this something to worry about? Well, these propagandists have come up with all sorts of crazy in the past. Is this laying the groundwork for a justification for nuclear going forward so that Putin has the idea tested with the general public? Possibly. Is this something to worry about? Possibly. Is it probably going to happen? I don't think so. There was talk about. In fact, I'll try and play you that. There's a really good Joe Rogan interview that took place over the last few days that I advocate people listening to. I don't really listen to Joe Rogan, but this I did listen to was fascinating. Peter Zeihan. So if you want to go and listen to that, um, he's a geopolitical strategist, speaker, and author, and he's written a book, "The End of the World Is Just the Beginning," mapping the collapse of globalization, talking about the kind of end of China, talking about the end of Russia and the end of civilization in the phase that we know it in, so on and so forth. But he was talking about again. I think it was him or it might have even been on Ukraine later, so I could have just gone off on one there. But the idea that if Putin decided to have a nuclear strike, apparently there's been very clear communication from Western nations, from America, that we know where you live, Putin. We know where you are at any given moment. If you press that button, you will get a nuclear Armageddon on your head. In other words, it's a very existential choice, which is if Putin decides to press a button, so America and others are impressing upon him. If you press a button, you will die. You personally, Putin, will die. Well, it will get you straight away. So it's not just a case of like, oh, let's start a nuclear Armageddon. And I'm going to be, down in this bunker and it'll all be fine. Actually, the idea is that it won't be. But also there have been lots of other threats back to Russia. So Russia know exactly what's going to happen. I think, broadly speaking, if they do nuclear, which is I think why they've dialed it down. China have said don't do nuclear. India have said don't do nuclear. So there's the allies have said don't do it. So I think Russia know that it's a really unlikely eventual like thing for them to do. Um, but there's a non-zero possibility it could happen. I just don't think it will. But again, is this laying the groundwork for this conversation to be had more openly? It's moving the Overton window. It's now something that can be discussed openly. Our propagandists are saying it. The population now hearing it. There's something called the mere exposure effect. The more you hear something, the more credible it becomes. It's like, oh, we're hearing that, and then suddenly, for the national population, okay, nuclear isn't this crazy idea. Actually, it's something that might happen. Yeah, Putin should do that. Okay, yeah, but how about the future of existence and your lives? Anyway, last thing I'm going to show you is something that gave me joy. So let's go from nuclear holocaust and impending death of all humanity to a guy dancing in the snow. And I've got a lot of time for this. There should be more people dancing in the snow. And this is a Bakhmut power dance from fighter Georgie. So take it away, Georgie. I hope I don't get a copyright infringement here for the music. Oh, you gotta love a bit of that leg twist in full combat gear as well. I mean, well done, well done. Keep yourselves happy, guys. Keep yourself warm. Keep yourselves safe. There you go. That was my, broadly speaking, just stream of consciousness rant at Russian propaganda. I apologize. I've just come off the back of a 2-hour live interview on philosophy and the existence of heaven and hell or non-existence. And so, yeah, I need to have breakfast now. And it's like almost 2 o'clock. So thanks anyway. Really appreciate you being my audience. Please like, subscribe, and share, and all those wonderful things you always do. Take care, and I will speak to you tomorrow.